You're listening to Dirty Feet, a podcast from No More Radio.
Vous écoutez le podcast Dirty Feet sur les ondes de No More Radio.
Hosted by,
animé par
Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
Stay tuned.
We're gonna move you.
The summer of 2015 marks the 25th anniversary of the Saint-Ambroise Montreal Fringe Festival. The Fringe is a concept that means that there's no curation in a lot of the programming. The artists are chosen by lottery or first come, first serve. And this is in accordance with the CAF, the Canadian Association of Fringe Festivals, their whole guidelines. So there's a bunch of fringe festivals across Canada, which, as we did last year, we're going to be bringing you coverage of over the summer. And there's some in the States as well. And of course, in Europe, in Edinburgh was the very first place to ever have a fringe festival. And then over on this side of the pond, it was Edmonton that picked it up. And from there, a lot of different ones came up. And of course, the Montreal one came up 25 years ago. So today we're going to be talking just exactly about that, about the non-curation, about the fact that participating in a fringe festival gets rid of the middleman. You go straight from artist to the public. And we're, of course, talking about it in the context of dance and in a broader context as well. More and more dance artists have been participating in the fringe over the years. This year, there are 7 dance shows in the festival. And of course, a lot of the multidisciplinary works also include dance as well. So we're sitting here with Amy Blackmore, who's the executive and artistic director of the festival. Hi, Amy.
How's it going?
Great. Thanks for being here. We're also joined by Jeff Agambar, who is the general manager of Mainline Theatre and the Montreal Fringe.
Hello, hello.
So I went a little bit over the history of the festival already. I'm wondering if there's points that you'd like to add, maybe in particular to this concept of non-curation and where that seed came from, where the need for the fringe came from, and how it has become such an important part of the artistic community.
I think that the interesting part of the story is that the Fringe is really a festival for artists, organized by artists. And it was rooted in that when it was founded. You know, like you said, the Fringe started in Edinburgh, and I love telling this story. And when I tell someone the story, they're always like, I had no idea. It's like, I think the Fringe is best kept secret, but it was founded in Edinburgh. You know, after World War II, the city of Edinburgh decided to organize a festival to sort of boost morale after the war, help people feel a little better about their lives. And instead of inviting local artists to present work at this local festival, they invited a bunch of out-of-towners, which really didn't go very well in the community. And there was a group of about 8 artists and companies from Edinburgh that decided, you know what, we're going to do our own thing. If you don't want us to be a part of your fun little festival, we'll do our own. And so for a couple years, annually, these group of artists would just present their work regardless, kind of, you know, on the fringe of the Edinburgh Festival. And that's what the journalists started to call it, the fringe of the Edinburgh Festival, now Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which, you know, as you said, has become this, you know, international movement that is now in Canada. I think, again, the interesting thing is that it is always about the artists first and foremost. You know, in Montreal, most of our staff are artists and have our own artistic practice. And I think that's something that's really special about what we do.
A note there, I actually am on staff at the Fringe this year, so just for the record.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, full disclosure. And it is true that also there tend to be a lot of dance people on staff these days, which is quite interesting.
And you have presented shows at the Fringe in past years as well, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about that, what the opportunity is for dance artists in the city, because it is a different opportunity than say Vue sur la Relève or Danse Buissonnière or something like that, where it is a very dance specific
Quartier Danse also
Quartier
is a good
Danse, yeah, dance specific festivals.
It's extremely curated.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that I'm frustrated that the downside of not curating a festival, of it being programmed by lottery, is that you don't know what you're going to get, which is also the upside. But in terms of this year's dance programming, it means only 7 dance shows. I'm like kind of sad about that, because I mean, I think 2 years ago, the way it worked out lottery wise was we had 15. So to go from 15 to 7, I don't know. I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, I think compared to other fringes, this was a question at last year's press conference, actually, I remember taking, where somebody was like, why is it that there's so much dance at the Montreal Fringe, but not, say, in Toronto or other fringes? It was a question posed by someone who does a dance blog, a dance site, and they are also a touring artist, and they were like, I've been to the other fringes. I noticed that this is unique, that there's more here than elsewhere, and which allowed us to underline the fact that because it's a model that's used in each city, it ends up in each city resembling its city. And I think in Montreal, one thing that is typical to Montreal but not elsewhere is that there is a very cross-disciplinary and experimental a dance community that's interested in self-producing anyway outside of the fringe context. And so what ends up happening in every city is the local artists and visiting artists that present as well, but the artists that participate end up using that festival in the way that city already behaves. And so in Montreal, we do see a lot of dance companies that want to use this model to experiment and play and test ideas. I think that is kind of unique and strong in Montreal, but it is true, as Amy points out, that does mean that there's no steady, like you can't set up a dance wing and make or volet, and sort of target a certain number of companies every year. It depends on who's in the hat and who comes out of the hat. Yeah.
No, it's funny. I mean, I like to think that the programming that we see at the festival is a reflection of what's going on in the community and of what's out there. And that is why you see so many different disciplines and also languages, and sort of cross-pollination of culture that is Montreal at the same time. But yeah.
That is something that the Toronto Fringe does, Jeff, that you were describing, that they do have a specific lottery category for the dance companies.
Oh, they do now?
Yeah. They have had for maybe 5 years or so.
Oh, yeah.
So, the benefit there is that if you're a dance company applying to the Toronto Fringe Festival, you're far more likely to get in than if you're applying in the theater category.
Oh, yeah, because theater category in Toronto is like 600 applications or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I wonder, do we know how many apply to the dance? I'd be very curious to know.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that it's all right, easier to get into.
Tip to all the theater artists: make dance shows, bring them to the Toronto Fringe. You'll get in.
It's so easy to call theater just dance now.
Yeah, totally.
It's basically, it's a movement piece.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But then we get into the categorization of things too, right? Because every year when we're looking at the Fringe program and what to cover for Dirty Feet, we look at the dance shows and that's an easy pick. And then there's all this other stuff, the physical theater, the circus, the multidisciplinary stuff that is really borderline and that has a lot of movement information in it and movement performance. And we do tend to include those as well. So perhaps, again, given the climate of the Montreal cultural scene, that it is important to keep the category nice and wide as just English performance art.
Oh, I mean, I would love to see, programming that wasn't labeled by anything. I mean, it kind of kills me that we even use language labels at the Fringe. I think it's important that we do that to make sure that everyone has a fair chance, but it would be great to just have none. Just be like everybody all together. I mean, the thing about non-curating is really just about setting up the circumstances and the environment for that sort of creates success for artists. At the Fringe, what we do is we supply an infrastructure and a sort of support system for artists' work. And then the idea is that they come in and do sort of whatever they want with it, especially the part when it comes to, no artistic direction, there's no censorship. They can come in and read a phone book on stage for an hour, which has happened at the Montreal Fringe. I can't remember what year, but it did.
There is a legend of a story where somebody sat in a rotating desk chair and over the course of an hour did a single 360-degree rotation. And so you would sit and you never saw them move once, but at 15 minutes in, they were a quarter of the turn. They had moved. Anyway,
was it under the category
that's
of Butoh,
probably even worse than listening to someone read a phone book.
But then
those are rare.
but that it sort of, also creates the environment for artists like Delphine from the company Tuc et Capuche. She has a show this year, and, her sort of history of presentation is sort of straight up contemporary dance with soundtrack. And at the Fringe this year, she's kind of experimenting with working with musicians, which for her is new. And she's sort of really excited about that. And I like the idea of being sort of one of the first points on a path, on a journey that will hopefully go really far.
It takes away a lot of the pressure when you present within a specific scene. Like, I know that in dance, a lot of people are afraid that one misstep is going to categorize their whole artistic parkour, and that if they do that one misstep afterwards, that's it, doors are closing for them. Whereas with the Fringe, because it's not as much of a specific audience, and there are a few presenters that show up, but it's still limited. Like, there's Dina DeVita that shows up to every Fringe dance show, but there's not as much of a spotlight from the dance community. So because of that, it lets people explore a lot more. It opens up without that fear of judgment that is going to be apparent if they're presenting within a dance community context.
I was going to say, I think it's also understood that this is a place to perhaps bring something that is quite developed and is very clear that this is a thing that's going to carry on and have a life outside of the Fringe as is, or added to. It's very clear what the path out of this show is, but it's also understood that this is a place to attempt something, to try something out. One of the points I always make is that, as a visual artist, if you're sitting in your studio working all day and then you put down the brushes and step back, you can look at your painting through the same window that your eventual audience will see it through, right? So you can experience your art in a way that is it already. There's a place to explore and observe. There's a whole process for that doesn't have to involve the public, the eventual audience yet, right? Same thing for writing. You can write in your journal alone in a room. You can do that for years, and then appear on to the world with a finished work that you've been able to experience and observe and sort of see its eventual manifestation. In the performing arts, I think that the art really only exists while the audience and artist are together making it in the room, right? And so I think in some ways also Fringe is a model where we take away a lot of the boundaries and that are baked into the fact that as a performing artist, there's a whole process that goes into it. But while you're rehearsing, while you're creating, even if you have a director or a choreographer in the room, it still doesn't quite exist until that moment where it's happening with the audience, and then it's gone again. If you film it and look at it afterwards, that's still a translation. It's not quite as direct a link as in the non-performative realms. So I think on some level, Fringe exists to create a space like the journal, like the studio, like that stepping back, where the art can happen. But it doesn't have to be considered. This is a finished thing. This is my professional work. Like the same points that you were making just earlier. Anyway, that's a reflection I always like to bring to the conversation of why Fringe is the way it is and why it has a place in the whole ecosystem of performing arts.
I think that the idea of Fringe sort of being a bit of that safe ground where you can experiment, do something a little different, and not worry about being shut out of the community for something or having doors closed. I think a lot of that also just comes from the fact that a lot of the audience at the Fringe is a little more mainstream, which is something that I think we realize more and more as we get older as a festival. It tends to be a place where people contact art. For a lot of people who come to the Fringe is that one time a year they go out and see theater and dance. And the interesting thing about it is that if there's something interesting in your work, it will get noticed. You don't have to have the best show, although that does help. But if there's a potential, or like like those shows that are like an almost show, like a feel-good show, or they were so close show, or wow, that show was amazing, or I love that concept. Oh, I want them to dig deeper. The Fringe is a kind of place where you can see that kind of work, fall in love with it because you're only paying like $10 or less to go to it, so it's super cheap. It's super easy because it's most dance shows are like 45 minutes, an hour tops. But you also, as an audience, get to talk about it, and you get to communicate with the artist about it and give them your feedback through, writing a review on the Fringe Buzz or tweeting #FringeBuzz. We really encourage the audience and the artist to sort of meet in that kind of way. And I think that, that's why like a lot of that, I don't want to say safe, because maybe safe isn't the right word, but just sort of that open environment of, we can sort of take these risks here because it's welcome and encouraged, and a bad review isn't going to get us down, kind of thing.
And I think there are fewer defining boundaries on what counts as best at the Fringe as well. Mm-hmm. There are many different types of best at the Fringe. It can be just something that's based on charisma. It can be something that's based on the theater side. Anyway, people talk about the theatricality often of shows, where because you're trying to keep, you're just really focusing on the experience you're creating in the room. Maybe it's not based on costumes. It's not. It's based on the set. It's not based on pyrotechnics, right?
Definitely no pyrotechnics at the Fringe, please.
Which I'm still hoping to see.
Amy's heart palpitation.
Oh man, it's like my worst nightmare.
Pyrotechnics. No, don't sneak that shit in.
Walking into a tech rehearsal where someone's like, I brought my personal pyrotechnics.
Fog machines are okay?
Pardon me?
Fog machines are okay?
No.
No.
It's they wouldn't be so bad, but at the Fringe, there's like sometimes 10 shows in the same venue in a day. You can't have like smoke lingering from the previous show.
Yeah. But the point being that there are many different types of best. There are many audiences within the Fringe audience, and that they and different very, very disparate things can find can find support at the Fringe, and then carry that audience forward.
That actually opens up a question for me, because one of the elements that is very important about this concept of non-curatorial festival, and just the way that the Fringe is run, I've mostly seen the one in Montreal, so I cannot speak for the other ones, but there's this very communal-based aspect to the Fringe, with the Fringe Park, with the beer tent and everything, of people gathering together, people talking together, exchanging about their shows. There's a lack of hierarchy in some ways that seems very fundamental to the Fringe, I find. But then there's the Frankies, which are basically awards, and there's other aspects of it which feel a bit different from the main spirit of the Fringe. But I know that during the evening of the Frankies, it's very much a continuation of that celebrative aspect of it. But do you feel sometimes that maybe an aspect such as awards and nominations and all of that take a bit away from that, the non-judgmental aspect of the Fringe?
I think that as organizers, we set up a non-judgmental platform. And I think that once the festival starts, all judgments are welcome. All opinions are welcome. And it's okay to say a show isn't good or to say that it's a hit. And I find that, as you mentioned earlier, it's not a festival where, presenters from all over the world come to, but it is a festival where the local theater and dance artistic directors do come to in quite big numbers. Like people from Complètement Cirque are coming this year, or I was talking to the artistic director of L'Espace Libre. He's really excited to come to see what's going on. And the Frankie Awards and the nominations for the awards are a way to sort of, as the artists leave the festival, sort of prop them up and then push them forward and kind of up that little hill.
That's why they were created. They were created to for a couple of reasons. One was to try and create to bake in some future opportunities for shows that rose above for being what one group that has decided is the best choreography, for example. But we also have awards that are awarded for the thing that that such and such a group thought was the most had the best potential, and we'd like to work with them to mold that into something that has a stronger foundation. There are many different motivations for the different prizes. So there was that kind of trying to create windows post Fringe for within the year following immediately. That we always tried to link them to some kind of production opportunity outside of the Fringe, if possible.
Yeah, the best is when an artist gets to present again.
Yeah, and but then also to create a context for these different presenting groups around town to be involved and see a very high percentage of this year's shows. So there's also that aspect. The whole jury process is part of baking in a process where a lot of the shows are being seen by the people that in the community.
Baking in.
Yeah.
I like that. Are we going to have lots of cake this year for 25 years?
Maybe. It
Okay,
should
sorry
be.
to interrupt.
Anyway, so the Frankies are about addressing some of the things that we wanted to create and add on to what was already strong in the festival. That you talk about the community aspect, the sharing, the discussion, the interaction, the direct contact between artists and audiences without somebody having pre-filtered what gets that opportunity or not. And Frankie's was a way of extending that. And like Amy says, I think it's not meant to be about deciding what the hits of this year are. The audience has already done that by the time we tell people what this year's Frankies are.
Yeah, by doing all their reviews and
there's ones, for example, just having Just for Laughs involved, and releasing a large short list means that there's 10 or 12 companies in a given year that can then go across the other 9 or 10 festivals that are coming up on the Fringe circuit, and
nominated for a Just for Laughs award.
And every single one of them can put that little laureate symbol with a Just for Laughs award nominee, and that can sell tickets in other towns. So there are concrete benefits that we're trying to give to not just the winner, but the nominees and the people that were seen by people that might have missed their show otherwise because of the jury process.
I'm under the impression that our awards program, I mean, ours is called the Frankie Awards, but, other festivals have their own names for their awards. But I'm under the impression that ours is really what the other Fringes in Canada are modeling theirs after, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
I like that. We're the cool Fringe guys. Everybody copies us.
Alongside that, there's also coverage as well, because producing your work independently, it's very hard to get media attention. And in the context of the festival, regardless of the fact that it's not curated, you're going to get more attention as an artist. And then again, you can use it the same way you're using this nomination, go across to other Fringe festivals or other contexts in general, apply for grants. So, sell your work to a presenter with these, media plugs tagged onto it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously the challenge of trying to get in contact with presenters and producers, but in the media environment, as fractured as it is, that can having that little nominee tag or whatever can help to create some media coverage, which is so hard to find and stick together into something that is a good foundation for a lot of buzz in a mainstream audience outside of this kind of context.
I'll never forget traveling to the Buxton Fringe in 2006. Buxton is this little town like 45 minutes south of Manchester, and I brought my show, I Love New York, and I was, it was before dance school. I was a young and impressionable little artist, but I went across the ocean to go there. And I had like 7 people in every show. It was kind of turning into a bit of a disaster. And then somebody came to my show, and in her review, it said, "Deserve to play to packed houses." So we printed that out in big letters and put it on all of our posters, and we had great attendance for the rest of the run. So it's like those little pull quotes from journalists that just happen to come to your show because they're at the Fringe, not because they're there for your show. Oh, those are nice moments.
Totally.
Yeah.
So there's something unique about the Montreal Fringe Festival in the language situation here. When you pull from the local categories, you pull equal amounts of English and French companies. And then when we're talking about dance, sometimes the company is rooted in one language or another, and then they create a bilingual show or a non-lingual show. And that creates a slightly different atmosphere than in other cities where it's kind of understood that, across Canada, it's English. English is the primary language for these productions.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's, I think about it all the time. It would be so great to have like a bilingual category or a nonverbal category where, but then it's like, how do you even like pay attention to that and follow that, and I don't know. I mean,
we've even debated whether eventually it gets to a point, or maybe there's a point in the history, but it wouldn't stay that way necessarily, when the locals, the 70% that's split half and half, English and French, that maybe there's every year we say, is this a year when we should list and just call it 70% local? No, it's not really right.
It
we still want to make sure
yet.
that there's a distribution, and that you don't end up with a year where it's like, because the lottery gods have gone against us, we end up with 90% English, or vice versa. That both communities rely on it. So splitting it equally seems the right decision still.
But the thing that is sort of coming up soon is, or at least that we're discussing nationally as a fringe movement, what we're discussing is the idea of having sort of like a tour for French companies going across the country that would potentially start in Montreal, go to Ottawa, and then, perhaps Toronto, I guess, depending. But, there's conversations about how there is a francophone arts community in Edmonton, in Winnipeg, in Fundy. Not in Fundy, that's not a city, that's the name of their fringe. St. John,
Saskatoon, we discovered.
Saskatoon. So
Vancouver as well uses the French Center in Vancouver. Yeah.
I think it's coming along. I think that will be a thing.
It's a conversation that is happening.
One thing to go back to that element of the divide between French and English. From year to year, I find that there's more and more interest and participation from the French community. Now, that might just be me looking at it wishfully from the outside, but is this correct? Like, I feel that the French audience is getting it more and more. They're understanding more and more what the French is about, what it represents. All of those ethical aspects of the French also are being embraced more and more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've definitely seen a lot of growth in that area for our festival over recent years. The other day I actually spoke on a panel at Espace Libre about, Anglophone arts in Quebec. And I was kind of like, well, I kind of represent both, but okay. And it was really interesting to talk about fringe and to talk about the concept to some people who'd never heard of it before. But I think that what's really attractive is that it is, it's democratic, and it's, it's a festival for the people, right? For the artists, but also for the people. And I think there's a lot of respect in that for the artist people. But yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, like we were saying, it kind of there's a structure that kind of tries to keep costs and risks down and maximize the returns as much as possible. Like what is being generated, the interest that is generated in a given year, that's going to be represented directly in how much money is coming back to that artist that year. Like we have those kind of things, and those are kind of dry and abstracted a bit. What it means on the ground is that it can be used the way you want to use it. Some people use it. I've seen artists come through that probably are not meant to have a career, but they always dreamed of it, and they're just going to do it, and now they've done it, and it didn't go very well, but they feel satisfied that they can put that to bed. And the Fringe is there for an artist like that. It also is there for whole communities to use the way they are. And the way the Francophone community has tended to use the Fringe more and more, and the way the Anglophone community has used the Fringe for going back a full 25 years, and it's been bilingual since the beginning. But like you say, in the last 10 or 15 years, Francophone artists and audiences, I feel, have really started to get it more and more, as you were saying, and there's a very strong star system, and a very deep and broad community of performing arts in Québécois and Montreal culture, and what we see in the tendency of the Francophone companies is a lot of them are coming. They're already kind of together. They're coming out of a training program. They're together as a company that may involve 12, 15 people in some cases, and they all have set roles and they have a vision for their next 10 years. They've already incorporated even in a lot of cases, but they're not seeing necessarily an opportunity to to produce or be produced. And what they're using the Fringe for is for those first 2 or 3 productions where they've got all the chops, they've got a clear vision, and they just need a stage to show that. And that's a very strong tendency in the Francophone Quebec theater companies and also common to dance companies regardless of language, I think, is that they're already coming kind of with a professional practice in mind, but they're at a stage where the opportunities to practice that in front of audience and see media and see producers are limited.
I think there's a desire, from that community to use the festival as a laboratoire genre, and that's the word that we hear over and over again, sort of from them, is we want to come use it as a laboratoire, see what kind of opportunities can open up for us, and we want to meet other artists. We want to meet English artists. We want to meet artists that are touring. I think that the 3 of us as people who went to Concordia and dance, it took, I think, a while for me to meet my, JD, I met you at Concordia, but my Francophone counterparts from UQAM, it took years before I met them. Mm-hmm. And, I think that there's a lot of artists that come to the Fringe so they can meet each other, mm-hmm. so they can mingle with the other, even though it's the same. Yeah. But, yeah.
There's also, there are companies that come with something that is very much the shape and content and style and type that is sort of ripe to be kind of grabbed by the star system and shot up to the upper levels very quickly, and made kind of a vedette right now in the next couple of years. There's also companies that I can think of that from the Francophone side, since we're talking about that at this moment, that have something that they don't think fits the kind of the models that are being sought during this sort of 3 or 5 year period of trends by Le Star System, and they also they want a place to be seen and practice and do something that isn't aimed at being on a main stage in the next 3 years, but something completely different. I can think of companies like Belzebrut that were focused at they called themselves more of a rock band, and they did very well at the Fringe and got seen and may not have been produced otherwise, and now they produce their own festivals and stuff. Anyway, very interesting trend on that side as well, where the Star System is a huge benefit to artists and a great infrastructure that has been built over years and generations, but if you don't fit the tube, what do you do? And the Fringe is in place for companies like that as well.
This is relating a lot to a conversation that we had with Sandrine Lafonde, who did Little Lady at different Fringe festivals across Canada. We had her in for episode 120, and she talked a lot about just this. She went on to get her work produced by producers and presenters afterwards, but just that experience of having professional level work and using the Fringe Festival as a platform to work the show, to get some recognition for it, and to test it.
Yeah, to test it out in front of open audiences, which is also kind of fun.
Yeah, and to prove there is an audience. We can't produce that. There's no audience for that. Oh, yes, there is. There's an audience all across Canada for that. Okay, well, we'll produce that now. Anyway.
One aspect also of that non-curatorial thing that is very much the essence of the Fringe is that also there's no artistic direction. We haven't talked about that so much, but I feel that it's very essential because it allows a much freer artistic approach, but it can also lead to stuff that could be very outrageous to some people. And I feel that in especially with social media and everything, the media has become a lot more, not so much PC, but risk averting, I would say maybe. Do you feel that with the Fringe, this is something that is non-negotiable, that no artistic direction, you can do pretty much whatever you want on stage? Or do you feel that this is something that with the way that society has been going recently, we could lose a bit of that, like there could be a bit more of a reins being imposed on artists?
For us, no illegal activity is allowed on stage. And that, I don't see that changing. It's interesting, I almost feel like when the Fringe happens, it's almost like the community, including the media, sort of like go like, oh yeah, we can't talk about these things, or oh yeah, we can't say fuck on stage. Oh yeah, like oh yeah, I can totally be naked. Or other way more outrageous things than the very. It's kind of funny. Those things sound not outrageous at all to me, but in papers, I think people can fit in the swear words and can add in that kind of like outrageous fluff, let's say almost. So no, I don't really see that as a threat to it. Yeah. No, I think the biggest threat to non-created content is there is. It's hard to talk about sometimes. I call myself an artistic director, but it's even though we have no artistic direction. But it's really because my job is to adhere to the integrity of our festival and to adhere to our mandate and to sort of help preserve it for, generations to come. I'd love to see that, like the 100th Fringe Festival. Probably won't see that, but it would be fun to hope that would happen one day.
But somebody will.
Somebody will. Our children. Great grandchildren. Never mind. Someone will. But yeah, I mean, and that's really the important thing is adhering to the integrity to sort of preserve that movement. I think the moment that the word fringe doesn't mean anything anymore, it would be a real shame.
Yeah. That is obviously an artistic directorial choice to not have the artistic director make the choices, but to have to put faith in a community to do what it wants to do and to let the community sort it out.
Well, and also sorry to interrupt, Jeff, but also I mean it's I love our institutions in town that put on work. I think they're very important. But at the same time, if we have the same artistic directors in place for like 20 years at the same venue, you're not going to really see an evolution of work. Or you probably will if they're a good artistic director, but that's not the case in everybody's circumstance. And, I think that it is important to allow the audience to become the artistic director, to become the curator, which is what happens at Fringe, because word of mouth is what's really key, and Fringe buzz is queen. It's the queen bee, like I like to say. But, I think it's almost like Fringe can be a lesson to artistic directors. It's like, what works at the Fringe? What's packing houses there? Will that help influence my choices and my decisions? Can I bring people what they want instead of what I want?
Yeah, and there are examples of festivals that have been started up to sort of choose segments of that and represent it in a more formalized setting elsewhere in the calendar as well. I think one point I was going to make earlier in relation to where we just embarked on this question, one risk to that sort of lack of artistic direction is I think that there is a tendency for people who aren't already on the train, right? The Fringe train is they open up the program and they open up the program and they see so many things and there's sort of there's an anxiety I think that happens in people's hearts where they look at that and they go, well, if nobody has chosen for me and I choose a show, and through the idea of I'm going to choose a show, which is also sort of not Fringe kind of way that people do it who are into it, but I'm going to choose a show and I make a bad choice. Does that mean that that I'm a bad audience member, that I'm a bad tastemaker?
I want to hug that person.
I think there is sort of an anxiety around that. There's a habituation to having already had somebody make the choices, and then you go and then you blame them for the bad choice. An artistic director has programmed this thing, brought together the best shows from all around the world, and now I'm going to go watch and I hate all but one of them. And I have better taste than the person who makes the taste choices, right? And in this case, there is no tastemaker who's pre-chosen. You are the first person making the choice. And I think there is a certain fear and anxiety around that for people who are new to it, who don't realize that this is a festival where that's That's not what it's about. It is about choose 6 shows, choose one that a reviewer has said is great, choose one that you like the poster, choose one that you like the title, choose one that you bumped into someone in a lineup and they said, I saw this and it was great, and go see all of those things. If you see 6 shows at our festival chosen completely at random, if you see 10 shows at our festival chosen completely at random, get a 10-show pass and go. You're gonna one of them. It's almost guaranteed that one of them, that you possibly even one that you didn't choose on purpose, will just blow your mind as something. I've sat in a room for an hour and I saw something I never imagined was possible, and I was totally in love with it the whole time, and I walked out in a daze. And no one went. No one traveled to Belgium to choose it for me. It came here and I found it at random, and now I can go out and be the person to say in that lineup, go see this show because it was totally amazing, and nobody's talking about it, and you need to get out early and tell everybody and make it a hit in the next 10 days. It's that kind of festival.
And the fun thing is that, for me, is also that the money you spent on going to that show goes right into that person's pockets. It doesn't go to a diffuseur. It doesn't go to anybody else. It goes straight to that artist, which is kind of cool.
And for the privilege of seeing 6 shows at our festival, you can get that for the price of 1 ticket at another. And what's the difference is that the 1 ticket, somebody said you're going to like it, and your chances of liking it are probably pretty equal to any one of the shows you choose at ours, because your taste is yours if you choose to explore it. And and in ours, you still get another 5 chances.
And you might end up seeing the next Azure Barton or Dave St. Pierre, who both presented work at the Fringe Festival.
Fred Gravel.
Before they were known, they did 2 or 3 shows. Fred did 2 or 3 shows back at our festival back in the early 2000s. I think it was another 4 or 5 years before things really started to pick up for him as a confirmed artist in confirmed festivals.
Cool. Well, I think we've definitely sold people on coming out to the Fringe after that. We're going to wrap it up. We've been speaking about the art of non-curation in the context specifically of the Saint Ambroise Montreal Fringe Festival. We've been talking to Jeff Agambar, the general manager, and Amy Blackmore, the executive and artistic director. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Dirty Feet was previously recorded at the Montreal Improv Theatre and is currently recorded out of Mainline Theatre. Thanks, dudes.
Dirty Feet est produit et animé par,
produced and hosted by Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
You can find out more about our show at nomoreradio.com, follow us on Twitter at Dirty Feet, and find us on Facebook at Dirty Feet Podcast.
Vous pouvez écouter tous nos épisodes sur notre site web ou vous pouvez vous abonner également sur iTunes à notre podcast.
Listen to past episodes on website or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes.
While you're there, be sure to give us a rating and or leave a comment to help us spread the word.
Tune in next week for a whole new show.